VikesNow, Dustin Baker, the September 1st edition. You've made it to the best month of the year. It's not even my birthday month like Josh Fry said was his yesterday on the show. We went through those Vikings items. My birthday's in October, if you care. However, this is the best month because the weather starts to get better, not hot. And football is back in a mere week. A week from tonight, you'll be watching Bills, Rams, and then 3 days after that, Vikings, Packers. So you've made it. Minnesota State Fair is going on. I'm heading up there this weekend. Should be a blast. But what we're going to do is a lot of stuff that's happened in the last week. So what happened with the Vikings roster finalization is a lot of mysteries were solved in terms of going into 2022. The puzzle is complete in terms of what the vision was in all of free agency and all of the draft, all of training camp, all of the preseason. We got to learn the fruition of all the stuff this show has spitballed for over 5 months now. So this show is aptly titled The Humongous Things That We Learned, because now, in terms of the mysteries solved, they're in the rear view. I'm going to go, these are actually ranked in importance, in order of importance. Look at me doing that for once, and not a bunch of scatterbrained random stuff. So I want to give you, ladies and gentlemen, the 8 items learned from this summer about the Vikings. And to me, they're humongous because it's Viking stuff. So if you're watching a show like this, I hope that you agree. The first, number 8, going down the snake, is that they are sticking with Garrett Bradbury at center. This was a saga because Bradbury was a first-round pick and would have had, theoretically, a 5th-year option on his contract if the Vikings wanted anything to do with that. However, that would have been like $13 million, and that would have been ridiculous money almost for any center, especially Bradbury. So there was the contract. We kind of knew they'd decline the 5th-year option. In March, J.C. Tretter was stunningly released by the Browns. He'd later retire, but we didn't know that at the time. So we, for 5 months, convinced ourselves that he would come to the Vikings. Wouldn't you know it? He wanted to come to the Vikings because as a kid, he grew up cheering for the team. So part of your hypothesis was correct. There was a tunnel for him to play for the Vikings because his previous employer is now the general manager of the Vikings. Apparently, allegedly, they never talked, or the Vikings didn't return the email or phone call. Alas, they're sticking with Garrett Bradbury. They have contingency plans in Chris Reed, who was signed as a free agent from the Colts, and then Austin Schlottman, who came from the Denver Broncos. But to pound it home, for better or worse, heavy emphasis on the latter, they're going with Bradbury at center after 3 years' worth of pass protecting struggles for that gentleman. They're going to try to fix him. We shall see if it works. It doesn't appear that it's a grand solution throughout June, July, and August, but would they really, a new brand of leadership, waltz into this thing thinking, well, he sucks, that's okay. Cousins going to get ransacked. That's the way it goes. No, throughout the process with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell, they've been solution-oriented. When it was apparent that the QB2 position sucked, they went and traded for one. They got Jalen Reagor to get richer on offense yesterday. We'll get to that in about 5 minutes. But the 8th biggest item that we learned, takeaway, is, I guess, development, is that Garrett Bradbury is the incumbent center and his job was not stolen from him. Number 7 is Armon Watts is not a part of the 2022 Vikings plans. When they released their own damn depth chart, getting ready for the Raiders game a few weeks ago, Watts lived on there as a starting defensive end in the 3-4 defense. He's a defensive tackle by trade. He even played some nose tackle last year when Michael Pierce was hurt. But he was trending to start by their own revelation, and we were going to see if last year his 60 blah, blah, blah PFF ranking, if it was an outlier or if he's going to be a starter in this league. Now you won't find that out, at least not for the Vikings, because Watts joined the Chicago Bears, where he'll vie for a starting job. They have Angelo Blackson and Justin Jones, I think, slated on their own depth chart as starters, but that was before Watts arrived. So we shall see if Watts can be Akeem Hicks 2.0. Let's hope not. But that was a stunning, shocking release because it was on none of our radar. We overvalued him, as fans, as writers, analysts, because they didn't even bench him. they said, we don't want you on the team. You're going to be released. And of course, he didn't clear waivers, didn't come back to the practice squad. He now plays for the Bears. But in terms of shock value, that one just fell out of the sky, kind of like another one on this list that's coming up. Number 6, only because this is the Vikings we're talking about, and there's history attached to this. It's the sudden prestige that comes along with the kicker and the punter. Now, if this was a Ravens show or some shit like that, nobody would care about putting kickers and punters on their 8 humongous things list. But these are the Vikings, who habitually have weird shit happen on special teams, especially at kicker at the worst possible time. Throughout 2-3 months, the kicker and punter positions have become trustworthy, at least from a going into the regular season perspective. I'm not crazy worried about the kicker or the punter. Usually I am. It's like, well, let's see how last year, let's see how this Joseph guy does. And then 2 weeks into the experiment, he lost the football game for the Vikings. I don't have that anxiety that's usually attached to Viking special teams. Now, Ryan Wright has to do a lot more than just have one sweet punt game in Denver and thin air in Denver. Same with Joseph. He drilled the 58-yard field goal in Denver. A lot of people do that in Denver, but we didn't know going into the summer, is Jordan Berry going to be the guy? Probably. Most of us thought that way. When they signed Gabe Burgess, the rookie from Oklahoma, we thought there would be a camp battle. That only lasted, he was only there for a few weeks. After June minicamp, they said, get the hell out of here to Gabe. But now it's Greg Joseph, who has this rocket leg that's kicking 55, 60-yard field goals in training camp, and then drilled one in the preseason. And then the punter, who averaged 56.3 yards per punt in his first salvo as the guy at punter. So I think just the putting fears at bay, we're not going into this season with let's throw these idiots out there, this kicker and punter, and see if it sticks. No, you feel relatively confident, as much as a Vikings fan can, about Greg Joseph and Ryan Wright. Number 5. I struggled with this one because it's a bunch of fancy talk. Still, it's noteworthy because it's so widespread. It's the emergence of Christian Darrisaw in his sophomore season. Last year, would it take him 5 games to get into the mix because he was hurt? And then he showed up, I think, against the Lions, started to look good. In the end, he had a 71.9 grade from Pro Football Focus, which is phenomenal as a building block for a rookie left tackle. In theory, this summer, he could have taken a step back, or you just don't hear anything about him until the regular season, and you hope that he builds upon his sophomore campaign and avoids a slump. But the whispers, the chirps coming out of Egan and even some national punditry is that this guy looks really good heading into his second year. You could have heard the opposite. Oh, yeah, he's taken a step back. You didn't hear that at all. You're hearing Trent Williams comparisons. So because the Vikings had Riley Reif on that side for a while, haven't really had a cornerstone tackle since Bryant McKinney. If Darrisaw is trending that way, it's vital, it's important. What this comes down to is if the very kind, pleasant words that are being said about Darrisaw pay off, then this is a gigantic summer development, because even I didn't know that he's on this trend to be quasi Hall of Famer if he's compared to Trent Williams. So when the regular season starts, it'll be a good litmus test to see, all right, is this guy, a mauler, a dog? Is he going to be in the conversation of the top 10 best left tackles in the business? If he is, it will have meant that Spielman nailed that pick, which was a rarity in the 2021 NFL draft, evidently. But it's big news because the offensive line woes for the Vikings are well documented and have lasted for a decade. Matt Khalil was good for a year, and then he wasn't. Brian McKinney was good for a decade, and then he moved on to win a Super Bowl with the Ravens. We want this homegrown Darrisaw product, Virginia Tech, to be there forever. We want him to start there until he's 38 years old. The summer of 2022 indicated he's on the right path. So by default, I think it has to be one of the biggest summer things that we've gleaned. Number 4 is the death of the 2021 draft class. I'm going to forget all the names. I didn't jot them down, but it is Chaz Surratt, Kellen Mond, Janarius Robinson, Wyatt Davis, Amir Smith-Marset, Jalen Twyman, Zach Davidson, all of them were waived. Now a couple came back with Zach Davidson and Twyman and Janarius Robinson, the practice squad, so no harm, no foul there. But generally speaking, the new regime waltzed into Minneapolis, evaluated the 2021 draft class, and said through its actions, we don't like these guys. Tough shit. We're keeping our guys. Luigi Villand wasn't even in the draft class, but he made the 53-man roster. So it's like this inherent human nature where a new GM believes the guys he picked, he did so for good reason, and therefore the old guys got to go. Now, it looks ridiculous when you look back on it because it makes Spielman look like a lunatic. The only ones that are going to pan out from that draft are Christian Darrisaw, Kene Nwangwu, Patrick Jones, and Cameron Bynum. Now, as a standalone foursome, if those guys rise to prominence, then the draft class really isn't all that bad. But it's the optics of like 5 dudes being released, waived on the same day. Again, a couple of them came back to the practice squad, so it's not doomsday thinking. But if you're going to evaluate it now, especially the trade with the Jets where they got Darrisaw and Mond and Davis, that trade looked good the night of. The trade does not look good now, aside from the Darrisaw, who we just talked about. So, 2021 draft class, the most of it is not held in high regard by Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and we did not know that, on June 1st. Number 3, we haven't even talked about this in a standalone show, and it could be chatted about for 45 minutes, is the Jalen Reagor trade. Yesterday on this show, I called it goofy because it was only sourced to one place. The Twitter account was called Let's Go to the Phones, a Philadelphia podcast that tweeted on Tuesday, the Vikings and Jets are in talks for Jalen Reagor. Now, you see a lot of stupid parody accounts on the internet. This wasn't one of them. It was sourced correctly. I wrote about it on Vikings territory the day before it happened and said, I think there's merit to this because their track record is not, just clickbait or it's not conspiracy theories. Indeed, it happened. So now Jalen Reagor becomes instantly the team's WR4 because they got rid of Amir Smith-Marset, which I'm sure you're not happy about. I think in the end, if Amir Smith-Marset doesn't make it back to the practice squad, you'll probably know that by the time you're watching this, we, me, you, and everybody on their couches overvalued Amir Smith-Marset, at least compared to how the current regime sees him. Some folks think that it was a step backward to get rid of Amir Smith-Marset and get Reagor. But, I don't know, Kwesi likes these TCU guys. Ross Blacklock, the defensive tackle that was lured to the Vikings through the Houston Texans channels, he's from TCU too. And, that's where Reagor comes from. So suddenly, you have an opportunity to unlock Reagor as he hasn't been unlocked before. Now, does that happen? Who knows? He's a playmaker. He's a punt returner. But they're doing something. It's kind of like when the Timberwolves swung for the fences for Rudy Gobert. They're like, we're going to do this. We're going to make a splash. And it's the new vibes of a front office saying we're not doing things the old way. I don't think that Rick Spielman would have traded for Jalen Reagor. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did. It was huge news, dropped out of the sky, and they had to give up a 4th rounder and a 7th rounder for it. So, you didn't know 2 days ago, let alone 2 months ago, that the WR4 of the Minnesota Vikings would be the guy who was drafted before Justin Jefferson. And it's the same situation from the Twitter video where Spielman and Zimmer laughed because the Eagles passed on Jefferson. Now you get the best of both worlds. Number 2, it's obvious now because we watched it slowly turn into a car wreck, is that Kellen Mond flamed out over the summer. It's kind of like the frog boiling in water analogy or parable that if you drop a frog into boiling water, it'll instantly just jump out, out of panic. But if this is from the movie Dante's Peak, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but if you put a frog in a pan of water and then slowly boil it, it'll just sit there and die, boil to death and not even, react or feel it. So that's how it is with Mond. We've known since the San Francisco 49ers game 2 weeks ago that, he did not build on his first game performance, and he should have because he's playing against second-teamers and third-teamers. There's no excuse for him to look like a moron. Fortunately, he stunk up the joint twice, and he doesn't work here anymore. But when you look back at Vikings history in the last, 16 months, that's how long Mon lasted, he was chosen kind of in that rogue mentality by Spielman as the guy who could potentially succeed Kirk Cousins. That is vanquished. That will not happen. Mond plays for the Browns. He'll probably end up as the QB3 there if he's not cut again. But he was, in theory, an heir apparent to Cousins if they had the time to watch him develop. The development was not going swimmingly, and boom, he was waived by the new regime, another casualty of the 2021 draft class. But because of the hope and dream that we could have a franchise quarterback if this Cousins experiment goes 7-10 or 8-9 again, Mond is no longer an option. So the Vikings, with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in the front office, are absolutely back to square one for Cousins' contingency plans or the quarterback of the future. Of course, they hope that Cousins is just the quarterback for the future for, 34? The next 5-6 years. That's the plan. He should gel instantly with Kevin O'Connell. That's why they're doing this grand experiment. If he doesn't, you cannot look around to the depth chart and pivot to anybody else. Nick Mullins could keep the ship afloat, but he is not a QB1 forever. So, if this season, if we're doing a show in, 4 months, about, this is another shitty 8-9 season, I don't know what we're going to do, we're going to be talking about which quarterback to draft in April. I don't think they'll sit on their hands for another mediocre season. They're taking one crack at it with a new philosophy on offense and basically the same roster. Mond is no longer in that equation, and he could have been if he had a good summer. Finally, the most humongous item of the summer, and I'm going to set this up like a madman, because Minnesota's offensive line performance has been habitually bad for at least 8 years, arguably 10. Did pretty well when Peterson won the MVP. Any news about offensive linemen being good, being decent, not being horrible is noteworthy. Therefore, the draft of Ed Ingram out of LSU in the second round and his subsequent ascent to win the job in a matter of months is the most significant development of the Vikings summer. That's because we have endured Drew Samia, Oli Udoh, Dakota Dozier. Josh Klein was pretty good in 2019. Willie Beavers before them. It was all of these guys that were half-ass solutions that never quite did the trick. And year after year, you plug and played another one, hoping that this would be the year this dude figured it out. None of them ever did. Put a fork in them, they did not. It was always the same situation. All right, let's look at this offensive line. It's week 1. What do we got? Oh, they're getting that guy from the Jets, Dakota Dozier, to hope that he has a career renaissance. You and I knew that wasn't going to happen, and of course, it did not. Now, they have a gentleman in Ed Ingram that they found from a prestigious school that took the summer by the horns and said, I'm the starting right guard. You might as well go ahead and trade that other idiot you have to the Steelers. So they took that Jesse Davis, who was a tackle turned guard, evidently, and traded him for a conditional 7th rounder, which is basically nothing. They cleared out the depth chart for Ingram to be the starting right guard. In the event that Ingram ends up as a mainstay on the Vikings offensive line, God forbid, like a All-Pro or Pro Bowl, he had his emergence this summer, and we weren't sure if he would quite do that. We're so used to, we'll work these guys in, he'll start in 2023. Nope. This guy was ready on day one, and everyone else in his wake, whether it was Jesse Davis, Chris Reed, or Wyatt Davis, they're gone. Reed's still there, but he ain't going to start. So Ed Ingram absolutely seizing the day, grabbing the right guard job by its ears, in my opinion, is the biggest summer news story that came to fruition for these Minnesota Vikings. I will be back tomorrow. Not sure what we'll chat about. Could be the Rager trade, could be some of this practice squad stuff. That's all I got, and Skol, baby.